Hi, English learners. Welcome back to the Smithing Podcast. In today's episode, I have a very special guest. By the way, this is the second time we are recording this. The first time it didn't record all the way through, but let's say the second time is the charm. But without ranting, we do have a special guest today, and I'm really excited. Maybe you've heard of him from my intro video on italki, or maybe you've heard of him if you are in my lessons. If you are my regular student, you then have definitely heard of him. Hi, Drew. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Sli. It's nice to be here.
All right. So I know that a lot of your course, your app, and your channel, and your websites as well is all rooted from or partially rooted in your own story. You did try to learn Japanese for quite some time, and you even moved to Japan, but that didn't seem to work out as much until you started learning until you started learning Japanese as your first language. So, can you please tell us more about that? Can you please give us more information on that?
Sure. Well, my struggling with language learning began actually when I was young, and I've had a number of failures of
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn languages the traditional way. So the first one was actually when I was in elementary school, and that was
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn Latin.
Oh.
And then I failed next to learn Spanish, or
Mm-hmm.
actually, I failed to learn French
Okay.
in high school, and then Spanish in college. And I assumed that the reason I failed those was either because I was stupid or because I just wasn't surrounded by the language. You
Mm.
hear from people that immersion is the key to fluency.
Mm-hmm.
So when I had the opportunity to come to Japan, I came to Japan, and even after studying about a year and being surrounded by Japanese people all day, I still wasn't able to speak very well. I
Mm-hmm.
knew quite a few things because I spent a lot of time studying, doing a lot of the traditional things people do to learn, but it wasn't actually helping me speak. And what I discovered actually while I was walking through a park, not that far from where I'm recording this today, is that little kids, so little Japanese kids out here, uh, they were able to speak better than I was, and they're 2 or 3 years old talking with their parents. And I noticed, wow, like they're not doing any of the things I'm doing to learn. So they're not
Mm-hmm.
studying textbooks, they're not looking at flashcards or um, doing the typical kinds of things, and they're certainly not learning Japanese through English.
Mm-hmm.
So it occurred to me that because they're learning Japanese as a first language, that's how they're getting fluent. And kind of going deeper into it, I've studied this in great detail over a number of years because I really want to make it clear for people. But what's really happening as as they were, and they are, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
learning Japanese as a first language,
Right.
is they're removing the doubt that they have. So their parents are trying to
Mm.
make things very clear. And so what happens is a lot of people learning using traditional methods like translations or studying grammar tables, they're actually creating more doubt for
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And so it's a self-defeating uh, I don't know. I don't even know what it's really one of the most frustrating things in the world to learn
Mm-hmm.
because we're telling you this is how you get fluent, but they're really just teaching you more vocabulary. And
Right.
so when I changed the way I learned, I finally started becoming more confident, and the process was actually very quick. So I realized that you don't really become fluent by studying a whole bunch of words, trying to memorize them. You become fluent as you eliminate the doubt of or any doubt you have in any individual words and phrases. And that's
Right.
why you can use some things fluently and other things you can't. And so that's why actually a lot of the people I help now, they can speak fluently or they can talk a little bit at least about their job, but they have
Mm-hmm.
trouble talking about things outside of work. So what it means is that you're really fluent in some things and not others. And that's because you have no doubt about those things, but you do have doubt about other things. So that's kind of a longer explanation. But the basic idea is you're learning, if you learn a language as your first language, and you do this with your native language as well. So you learn For example, the vocabulary you might use in a particular profession, like a dentist or a doctor or at
Mm-hmm.
an office or something like that. So this is vocabulary that only you would use in that industry. And so other people would not know that. But that's vocabulary you have to learn, and you learn it as a first language. So you're actually trying to understand it and eliminate the doubt that you have, and that's what enables you to speak. So it's not being immersed in the language, because there are lots of people who live in English-speaking countries for years and still don't become fluent, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't admitted any doubt they have about the vocabulary.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for giving us your backstory. By the way, there is a question that I do have connected to learning English in certain parts, and we'll get to that. But a lot of people don't know what the difference is between ESL and EFL, apart from the fact that it stands for English as a second language or English as a first language. Could you please just explain a little bit more in terms of the difference between ESL and EFL from a teacher's or rather a guide's perspective and a student's perspective?
Sure. So you will, maybe listeners of this have probably heard of EFL as English as a foreign language.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically adapted that to just make it a little bit easier for people to understand the real important distinction between, are you understanding something directly the same way a native would, or
Mm-hmm.
are you using things like translations or definitions or grammar tables or studying rules or whatever that are actually putting steps in between you and the ability to communicate. So what
Right.
happens is the way you learn is the way you speak. So if you're learning through translations, and this is the English as a second language approach, then
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going to make you think through translations and hesitate and
Mm.
wonder if you're using things correctly when you speak.
Right.
But if you're learning things directly, which is understanding something as a first language, you're trying to eliminate the doubt and eliminate as many steps as possible, so that way you can understand things directly as a first language without any intermediate things like translations. And that's how you can speak. So if you eliminate the doubt by understanding things well, that's when you speak. So it's actually a very simple process, and it works the same whether you're trying to understand this as a teacher or a learner.
Mm-hmm.
As a teacher, this is really trying to make it clear. Actually, it's even more important for a teacher because so many
Mm-hmm.
people have spent years trying to learn how to teach English as a second language or a foreign
Right.
language or whatever they want to call it. And what they think they're doing is teaching people a bunch of rules and vocabulary, and then it becomes the student's job to really understand that and study it and develop fluency. But the
Right.
English as a first language approach, it really is the teacher's job to make the language perfectly understandable,
Mm-hmm.
to eliminate any doubt, and that's what enables the student to speak. So you
Right.
don't really want to just give them definitions or rules to memorize, because often that's going to create situations in conversations where people forget what they want to say or they get stuck for whatever reason. You really want to make it clear so that they have no doubt and they feel confidence about speaking.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. And when I listened to you speak from that first video that I was watching, which was your live video, and I remember you saying that ESL focuses on more is more, and then EFL would focus on less is more. If you learn more in depth, then you can take one phrase into speaking about computer programming to sports and other things as well. And when you learn more and more, you are highly not to remember all those words or those phrases that you've learned. And I remember in the previous episode, or rather the first time we were recording, you did mention that we are human beings. We are not uh, computers, in as much as we can program our minds or our brains. At the end of the day, we are not computers. And yes, you can perfectly program a computer to a certain code for it to do this, and that when you press this button and click this here and that icon. But when it comes to humans, these are people, and they can't just keep on taking in more and more information. On top of that, they're not just learning English, they might be learning other subjects or other modules. They are busy with their personal lives and their professional lives. So it really doesn't work that way. Even if someone has this remarkable memory, or this elephant memory, then they still would probably not know how to use the vocabulary because they've just memorized it, they've crammed it. However, they still don't understand it, therefore they don't know when to use it or even how to use it.
Yes, you've got that exactly right. Just to make it a little bit more kind of in detail for learners,
Mm-hmm.
the basic idea of a computer is that we can easily just type in, okay, this rule equals this, and so we
Right.
can say here's a word, here's the definition, and that's how you can use it. But with people, we easily remember things when we have stories or some kind of emotional
Right.
connection, but it's quite difficult for us. Like if I give you a list of numbers to remember, like 10 numbers or 12 numbers, you would probably not remember them. But we
Right.
are able to remember a string of numbers about 7 long, which is why phone numbers are usually that length.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the limitation of people. And
Mm-hmm.
so, getting back to your point about how people need to understand vocabulary, I don't want to make it sound like the English as a first language process is taking a longer time or you're learning
Mm.
less just for the sake of learning less. Really, the point is that if you don't understand something, it doesn't make sense to keep learning more. So if I'm going
Right.
to take 10 words, my goal is to learn 10 new words every day. But I don't actually understand those things very well, and I haven't eliminated the doubt. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
feel confident about using them, then I'm really wasting my time.
Right.
So at the beginning of the learning process, let's say I'm just starting to learn Korean or French or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm trying to do that, I really want to just understand a few things really, really well. And that gives me the confidence to continue learning more. And I can use those vocabulary words to then learn new things. And the process actually accelerates over time. While the person who's trying to study 100 words each day or more, whatever their goal is, they're probably not going to remember most of those. And so they won't really be making progress. So, as I pointed out at the beginning of the video, the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to develop fluency by eliminating doubt.
Mm.
And if you can eliminate the doubt, then you move on to the next word, and then it becomes much faster. And as I mentioned, it becomes a lot faster of a process of building fluency because you actually feel confident and certain about what you're learning.
Right. I just am thinking about the doubt and the confidence. It's almost like a game, especially when I was young, in my family and circle of friends. We only enjoyed the game if we were winning. And the more we won, the more confident we were. And the more confident we had higher chances in beating the other team.
Yes, so the motivation as well pays or it plays a large part in your ability to succeed. I'll just tell like a very quick story about this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say and this is unrelated to language learning, but it's connected to the same idea of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you have 2 credit cards that you need to pay off.
Right.
And the first credit card only has like, I don't know, $20 on it or something,
Mm-hmm.
and the interest rate is not very high. But the second
Mm-hmm.
credit card has $2,000 on it, and the interest rate is actually quite high. So which
Mm-hmm.
one should you pay off first? Now, a computer or robot would say, well, we should get rid of the higher credit card first. But the human way of dealing with it is more the brain just recognizes 2 credit cards.
Right.
And if I can pay off the first credit card, then I've eliminated like half of my problem. And
Right.
so this is the kind of human psychology way of dealing with things like this, where we feel great, like, wow, now I only have 1 credit card I need to pay
Mm-hmm.
off. And so that the problem in the way we can think about it, it seems like a lot smaller of a thing.
Right, right. Well, thank you so much for that detailed explanation. My next question here is, I've heard you saying and explaining that students who are learning English should listen 90%, however, only speak 10%. And I remember telling quite a few of my learners this, and they were like, how is that even possible? Are you sure that you can teach? Because practice makes perfect. I'm supposed to speak more in order to be more fluent. And I told them, how are you supposed to speak if you already don't know how to speak? It's like trying to pour from an empty glass. You need to be poured into first in order for you to pour out.
Yes, that's the right idea. The basic problem people have is they assume that speech comes from repeating things again and again. And that's where
Right.
that idea of practice makes perfect comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a couple problems with this. And really, the biggest problem is that actual communication is dynamic. And by that, I mean, you never really know what someone else is going to say in a conversation.
Right.
So, learning to, let's say, practice a speech where you know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you're going to say, it's just you talking. That's a different kind of training where repetition would actually be valuable than when you're trying to prepare for what other people say. Because
Mm-hmm.
let's say I go to an English classroom and the teacher tells me a particular word, like the teacher says hello. But
Mm-hmm.
then in the real world, someone says, what's up?
Yeah.
And certainly at that moment, I'm like, uh-oh. And now my brain is kind of, I'm stuck because I don't really know what they said. I wasn't prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't matter how many times I repeated the word hello.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of more fundamental problem about the way people practice and this idea of practice makes perfect. But the second problem is that repeating things to yourself or others doesn't actually help you understand a thing better. So
Mm-hmm.
I could teach you a new word like in Japanese and just repeat it again and again, but it doesn't matter how many times you write it down or how many times you repeat it. You're less likely to really understand that than if I gave you a bunch of different examples and really helped you understand that and cleared away any doubt you had about that thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing with me as like learning Japanese. So they have a completely different writing system than English. There are actually three different written languages or written
Wow.
scripts for Japanese, and like in addition to that, they do use some English. Sometimes you will find English characters,
Mm-hmm.
but knowing that, I can either try to take a lot of these characters and simply repeat them, like write them again and again, or I can come up with some way to really understand them, like create a story about them or something like that, which makes the
Mm-hmm.
process a lot easier. And I actually did a demonstration of this in a recent video where I was teaching people the Japanese character for the word snake.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking about this exact problem of the repetition where people talk about practice makes perfect. And yes, you can learn a language like that, but it's really very slow. And you don't have that aha moment that comes from real understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's again when I talk about the aha moment or the feeling you get when you really understand something, the elimination of doubt. These are all different ways of saying the same thing, but you have clarity about the thing where you basically unlock your ability to speak something because suddenly you're thinking, oh, I actually understand what I'm saying, and now I feel confident about saying it that I won't make mistakes.
Right, right. That is so, so true. And I just want to make sure for my part that I'm understanding correctly. When you talk about connecting words to stories, it's also something that you'd usually say where you say use natural variation and situations, right?
Yes. And so again, if I were trying to teach you, I could do two different lessons or teach two different groups of people two different ways. The first way would be to give them a list of words and just
Mm-hmm.
have them repeat that again and again. So either they write that or they have to stand up and say that in front of the class or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I give them a definition or a translation, but they're probably not going to remember that information. But the second lesson, where if I could take even that same list of vocabulary, but rather than just repeating it, I actually tell stories or explain the vocabulary in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I did a video recently. I forget how long ago this was, but I was talking about the word harsh.
Ah,
And so,
that's the
and,
first
and like,
live video. Oh, sorry, please go
sure. So,
ahead.
so you you probably know this example that, and I've done this with lots of different ones, but this was just some, if people are not familiar with me. So I could tell someone, here's a word, harsh, and here's a definition of it, or here's a translation. Now I'd like you to memorize that. Or I could give you some different examples. Like if I start yelling at you in this podcast right now and you say, whoa, like, why are you being so harsh?
Mm-hmm.
Or if I talk about harsh weather, or I talk about harsh soap that hurts my hands. As I
Mm-hmm.
give you more examples, this is what I call naturally varied review, where you're not repeating the thing, but you're hearing it in slightly different ways. And so that helps you understand the vocabulary. And this is just one way of that natural variation that we get when we learn languages as natives. And so you would have the same thing, like your grandmother says something, then your mother says something, and your friend says the same thing, and each of them has a slightly different voice. But together, they give you the pronunciation you have because they're kind of giving you that influence, and then you have your natural, unique voice. It's created from that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's because of all that variation that you got. So if you were only being taught English by one person, like one teacher or something, you would be much more likely to sound exactly like that person and feel bad
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't speak exactly like that teacher. And this is why I
Right.
tell people it's really important to get lots of influence like that. So even if you
Right.
have a single teacher, you should be getting lots of examples from natives, even talking about the same kinds of things.
Right. Right. And that's exactly what I tell my students as well, that in as much as you have me as a teacher, you should be speaking at least for a few minutes in a day with another native, and this will help you to, get natural variation. So thank you so much for that. Now, in my lesson, I had a student who had brought up an interesting question or point, and I couldn't really answer them. And I told them that try not to learn English by topic, and try to rather understand that you can use different phrases for different situations, or different vocabulary for different situations. And I also explained that you can't be fluent in English all at once, in all aspects of English at once, but you would rather be fluent in certain parts of it, just like you explained. Then the student asked, isn't that still the same as learning English in different topics?
Well, I mean, obviously, if we go back to the native example of,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, a young child, so a young child doesn't just magically get fluent and learn to speak the whole language all at once. They're
Right.
learning individual pieces of it. So they're learning some vocabulary. A child goes to a farm for the first time, and then they
Mm-hmm.
learn the names of farm animals, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean they know the names of every animal. And nobody does that. Nobody learns that way. We learn pieces of things one at a
Mm-hmm.
time. But the difference, the important thing I'm trying to make it clear for people, is that you really want to spend time to make sure you really understand the vocabulary and that you've eliminated any doubt you have, because it's really the doubt about grammar or pronunciation or word usage or whatever that's going to stop you from speaking. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you are learning pieces of the language one bit at a time, but it becomes much faster, as I mentioned, because you actually feel confident and motivated, and you really want to say something, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I don't understand. I would have to hear like the exact question from the learner, I suppose. But it sounds like they think that even though you're still learning pieces of the language, it's like the normal learning process, even though the
Yeah.
way of learning it is different.
Yeah.
So yes, like you still are focusing on individual things as you learn, the same way you would learn anything else. Like if I learn to play a sport, I'm going to focus on a particular part of that sport at a time, like throwing a baseball or kicking a soccer ball before I try to do something fancy like a bicycle kick or something like
Mm-hmm. Right.
that. And so, yes, you still are focused on individual things, but because you learn those individual things, if you learn them the right way and understand them well, that enables you to talk about other things, as you mentioned. Like if I like I've just mentioned baseball. So if you hit a ball out of the field area, out of the park, you can get a home run. So that's like the best thing you can do as a batter. in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And that phrase, to hit a home run, now can be used when you understand the origin of that and what it means. It just really means like a great job. You did a great thing.
Right.
And so I can use that expression because I understand it very well in many other situations that aren't related to baseball. But the context, even though it's a little bit different, we're still talking about someone doing a great job on a project, or a student did a great job at school, or a government official did something. Like, all of these things can be called home runs if
Mm-hmm.
people do them well. So this is again why it might seem like we're taking more time, or we're only focusing on particular things, but because you understand them really well, that enables you to use those things in other situations. Whereas the traditional way, someone might learn, okay, these are baseball phrases, and here's a phrase, it's home run, and that means you hit
Right.
the ball out of the park, and then you kind of stop the lesson there, and you don't encourage people to think about when else might you use this. And that's the important thing about kind of guiding learners to take the vocabulary and understand it the same way a native does. Because an interesting thing happens when we learn a language, where we almost like turn off our natural ability to ask questions about languages and think about when else they
Right.
might be used. So we're really dependent on teachers, and we, instead of thinking about, oh, like a home run, that's interesting, I heard people use that talking about business or dating
Right.
or something like that, when you're a native. But when you're a non-native, you just think, well, that word means this thing for only this situation. So it becomes very important for the teacher to make these things clear and to help students make these connections.
Right. And, speaking on that, I've done almost like a test with my students who have really agreed to go the EFL way and the students who have agreed to go the ESL way. I've seen the progression on the students that choose to learn English as their first language. At first, it was very weird for them. It was challenging for them to adapt. And as time went on, they were more confident, and their progression was way more rapid compared to the ESL students. And something that I noticed was the confidence that they had in the lesson. Now it's not just like I am teaching you and telling you what to do, but I'm almost like giving you a roadmap to your destination. And when they get there, they have this sense of achievement, like, wow, I actually did that. And I truly understand that. And whenever they get to the answer, they even would suggest something else. For example, I had a student that I was teaching, and she wanted to learn how to speak about the rain and the weather. And in that lesson, we were talking about the rain. And I said, you know what? Let's try something else. Think of how you can still use the word sprinkle, but not talking about the rain. And she said, well, I don't know, just about water, I guess. And I said, okay, that's good. But what about something else that's not even connected to, or something that is not even liquids? And she thought about food, and she said, oh, I sprinkle some salt on my fries. And I said, there you go. And then she started getting these other ideas as well. And she started to be even more confident because she understood it so well. And she started speaking almost like in cue, and it was so automatic instead of her having to translate, then speak again.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a perfect example of how that works. And I've actually done that same thing with my own children when I talk about the rain sprinkling, or them putting actual sprinkles on ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you're kind of guiding them to make these connections. And then you continue to ask, like you did, which was perfect, when else might you use that?
Right.
And as people start developing that, they really start making these connections, and they understand that fluency is really about making connections, because, again, we're not computers. We can't just call back information and try to understand. Like, we have to make things understandable. And when we feel no doubt, then we really start applying things in other situations. So that's a great story.
So true. All right. So the bigger issue, or I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of students have, and explained this and touched on it, maybe you can give a little bit more detail. Students have a big challenge when it comes to speaking. They always have to translate from their native language to their target language, in this case being English. And you did mention that how you speak is because of how you learn. But can you please go in a bit more detail for the listeners out there?
Sure. Well, it actually sounds like the story you just gave was a perfect example of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as an example, if we're talking about like I could put on a hat,
Right.
and I teach my children like I'm putting on a hat, and I'm also asking them what else might I put on, and
Mm,
just like physical things or whatever. So I could teach them clothing, but I'm also teaching them the activity or the action at the same time. So I'm putting something physically on. And so I say, oh, like, well, what might be the opposite of that? And so you have put on. And so like if we think about a light switch, like on and off. So maybe
right.
something it's like we don't like put off. Like put off would be something different, but oh, take off. That's interesting. And I'm kind of guiding them to understand things
Mm-hmm.
the native way, the same way you did with the sprinkle example. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're able to do this, people think they really need a translation in order to learn. Uh, at the same time, they forget that they didn't do that when they learned their native language.
Right.
So it's like if I'm a Chinese learner and now I'm trying to study English and I think, well, I have to get a translation of this. It's like, but your parents didn't give you any translations of Chinese when you were young.
Right.
And what they did do is try to make things understandable. In the same way, I would be very simple, just showing you, usually with children, especially, you're giving them some kind of visual example and showing them like put on and take off. And so I play with those words. I would make a whole lesson about like put and take. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, look at this. I'm going to like pick something up and put something down. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to put something on my head, or I'm going to, do other things like that. And
Right.
again, as they get all of this input, and again, the point of it is really just to make sure they have no doubt. And so we continue to do that until they make the kind of aha of like, now I got it lesson. I'll tell you a very quick story about the time I was doing this recently.
Mm-hmm.
So this was me at a restaurant. I was at an Indian restaurant with a friend and his daughter, and his daughter knows quite a bit of English, but she doesn't really speak very well. She has lots of issues with translating and hesitating and trying to think about rules. So these are
Mm-hmm.
all the typical things. And the interesting thing is she's also the daughter of a native English speaker.
Wow.
And you find this a lot, actually, like here in Japan, just because there are so few examples of people in um, like in Japan, or it could be any place else. But you might have parents that they know English, but they don't really spend much time talking with their children in that language. And so
Right.
she learned a little bit in school, and her parents know the language, but she had some difficulty expressing herself. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so I said, well, let me teach you English as a first language, not like the
Mm-hmm.
way you would learn it in school. Uh, and so I just pointed at some different things, and I said, I'm going to teach you English as a first language. Just make this very simple. And I pointed at some rice, and I said, I'm going to teach you an alien language, actually, just because she already knows some English, and it'd be a bit more difficult. But so I said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to teach you an alien language here, and I pointed at the rice on her plate, and I said, ka. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, oh, ka means rice. And I said, no, 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 wait, wait, wait. And then I pointed at a napkin, and I said, ka. And then I pointed at a menu, like a paper menu, and I said, ka. And she said, white. And so that aha moment comes when
Uh-huh.
she finally realizes what's the connection between all of these things. And that's her understanding the language in the alien language itself, rather
Mm-hmm.
than just getting a definition or a translation. So if I give a child or a learner, whatever age they are, a translation or a definition, I'm stopping them from actually learning anything. It's
Mm.
me like giving you a puzzle, but then immediately solving it for you. You're just like,
Right.
okay,
Right.
what did you do there? Where is the lesson in this?
Right.
But if I give you the puzzle and the kind of elements that you need to solve that, and then you solve that puzzle yourself, then you feel great about that. You understood that thing, and that's what it means to understand something as a native, so as a first language.
Right, right. Oh, that is such a good example for not only the learners, but more especially the teachers, you know. I don't mean to step on any teacher's toes, but really it is our responsibility to make sure that the student understands. And once they understand, then they are not doubtful, but they are confident. And once they are confident, then they will automatically speak. And it will be as if it's just in cue because they are confident. And if we are able, like you mentioned, Drew, not to solve the puzzle for them, because when we do this, I understand that it may seem like, oh, this is the easy way around, and let me just do this and that, and it's all completed. So I'm going to remove the pieces from the puzzle, and then now you have to do it. But how? Because I only saw you doing it once, and you probably have the memo to which puzzle belongs where. I'm the student. I need to learn, I need to understand how to do this. So, this is definitely something that I'm also trying to do in the lessons. I remember um, with one of the lessons that I did, I even did podcasts, like episodes on my podcast about this method, or rather this way of teaching or guiding the student. It was saying that using the word run, a battery doesn't have legs, but it can run out of energy. And I use that for other words as well. And, people really took on to it, and they were like, wow, I never thought about this. And another student was like, oh, so I'm also running late, but I might not even be running, but I am running late. And I said, there you go. And they started to be confident, and they started to pull out other things as well. And this was really helpful for me, apart from the fact that I got more bookings. This is why I say this course is literally just an investment, especially as a teacher. And when you're teaching and you are a freelancer, be it online or face to face in person, it is an investment. And even if you are an English learner in school, you are investing in your education. And even if you are an English learner not in school, you are investing in your job. And some jobs require people with a higher English level. And when you have that, you can get things such as promotions and more recognition. So it truly is an investment. Now, with that said, Drew, I really want to say thank you so much for dedicating your time. In nowadays, you don't really have courses or people who put their heart and soul into something. And when I heard your story, I knew that there's something here, and there's something really good. And there were many gems. I always tell my students about Frederick, especially the ones that struggle with pronunciation. It's really, really good. And the funny thing is, as teachers, we would teach students more vocabulary in order for them to understand, not understand, but in order for them to cram or memorize and pronounce it perfectly, and make them repeat, repeat, and repeat. However, there are so many English words. When will we finish them? Whereas we could just teach them the 48 sounds in English.
Yep, you've got it. So, I mean, teaching learners the various sounds is 44.
Oh, sorry,
Just to
44.
correct you, it's not at all, not at all. Just want to make sure we're passing along the right information.
Thank you so
But
much.
the important thing is that yes, we want to make it clear for people that, especially if your goal is to speak. Now, I understand some people maybe they don't care. They
Right.
just want to pass a test and they need to get
Yes.
whatever for a job or something like that. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, they actually need to speak.
Right.
And I've received so many emails from people that need help, and they can't get the job they want, or
Mm-hmm.
even the relationship they want. Maybe they're
Right.
interested in like a guy or a girl or whatever, but they can't communicate.
Right.
I remember the like Rosetta Stone, the language teaching company. They used to have an advertisement about that thing. Like a guy was trying to impress some Italian woman, and he only had like one day to do it or something like that. But so it's a universal problem. Obviously,
Right.
being able to communicate is really the most important, the most powerful skill you can learn. And I mean, most people know people in a particular profession who might not be that great at the job, but they're really good speakers. And so they're able
Right.
to, get like higher promotions or, more prestige or
Yep.
whatever, as you mentioned. And this is even in your native language.
Yes.
And so the important thing is like you can even not become so much better at your job, but earn much more simply by being a better speaker.
So true.
And many people have proven this to be true. But it's an amazing thing when people discover it for themselves.
Yes. Well, thank you so much once again, Drew. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We've covered a lot of ground, from the importance of understanding language structure, or rather just understanding language and learning it as your first language. And thank you so much for sharing your personal journey with learning Japanese, which just proves that this is not just something that you sucked out of your thumb. The proof is definitely in the pudding. Now, before we wrap up, could you please let our listeners know where they can find more or learn more about your app, website, course, and channel?
Sure. People can go to YouTube if they want to just start learning immediately with lots of different content that we have. And that's English Anyone. That's the channel. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram, I think, with other content as well. But most of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff we do is helping people learn with video because it's really the fastest way to get people to understand certainly more difficult things like seeing actual people communicate.
Mm-hmm.
We have an app as well, which is called Frederick, which is really great for people learning pronunciation or improving their listening and even grammar and building vocabulary. So there are over
Right.
2,000 words and sentences in the app. But this is also especially good if you have children who are trying to learn English for the first time. So I made it. The goal was to be able to have something. I imagine like an advertisement for it where I have
Mm-hmm.
these kind of parachutes dropping down into like a jungle or a desert or a city or whatever, all these different places, and kids are able to just find the tablet and start
Oh,
teaching themselves English
that's so
without
cool.
without needing their native language. So they would be able to figure it out like a puzzle. That's how it works.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. That would
But
be
EnglishAnyone.com is our main site, so you can go and learn more about programs and get in touch with us there.
all right. And what about the course?
So you're probably talking about Fluent for Life. We have a couple of
Yes.
different things that we offer. Everything is included in Fluent for Life, but this is where we take people who really just want all the hard work done for them. So we're going
Mm-hmm.
to basically get you fluent automatically by making the language understandable. So if I can kind of make you confident by eliminating your doubt, you will naturally start speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need to have physical classes with you where you repeat things to me. I just need to make sure you understand.
Right.
And been doing this for over 20 years and I'm pretty good at it.
Wow.
And I think, like most people who come to the program, they're really looking for certainty because they know a lot of English already. So this is already, it's for people who know quite a bit of English, but they're just not speaking fluently. And
Right.
again, the reason they're not is because of any doubts they have about vocabulary or grammar or whatever. So as we eliminate all of those things based on it could be lessons about particular topics or grammar or whatever, but as
Mm-hmm.
you check those off, as you no longer feel nervous about them, then you naturally start using them in your conversations. So
Mm-hmm.
the program works, it's guaranteed. And the reason it's guaranteed is because it's my fault if I don't get you fluent.
Right.
So that makes sense to people, but this is different from traditional learning where you are
Yeah.
supposed to sit there and study and try to memorize things, and if you don't learn, that's your fault. So I
Yeah.
think that's wrong. It's a bad way to teach, and so that's why we help people really understand things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, just hearing you speak, I wish that one day, hopefully, you would have a community where you invite teachers and maybe we can have our own course, something like that, that's more teacher focused. I really would love more teachers just to hop on this, definitely.
Yeah, it would be nice to do something. I actually began many years ago when we started the site. We had stuff for teachers. And if you look at some of our older videos on YouTube, we have some stuff like talking about things for teachers specifically. But we wanted to get directly to the learners. And we didn't want them to like have to wait. Like, let's say we teach a teacher, but then the school doesn't let them teach that way or whatever. And this is over 10 years ago. So there were fewer people doing freelance teaching, that kind of thing at the time. But maybe, yeah, it could be a better thing. I haven't had so many. I do have lots of teachers who follow me on YouTube, and I get messages from them, but nobody was really asking for a course or anything. I mean, in the same way that you joined and you just started applying what you learned right from the course, it's pretty easy to see how it would work as a teacher using it. But yeah, I mean, maybe having some kind of thing. I do have a few videos on YouTube that talk about how to teach English as a first language. And if you watch it, it's actually interesting to see how people will apply this idea of naturally varied review. And these are people who teach things other than English. Like I remember some guy was commenting, he's I think maybe an economics teacher. And he was like, wow, this really makes sense for helping people understand any kind of concept.
Exactly.
It's like, as you're making more connections, the point is not to repeat the thing over and over again, because if they don't get it with the first time, they're probably not going to get it the third time or the 10th time. But if you can explain it in a different way, then hopefully they'll get it. And so that's a lot of what I do on the channel, because I know how to teach. That's the easy part. The more difficult part is explaining to people that, hey, you don't actually need to speak to get fluent. If you want to speak, that's great, but you don't need to force yourself to speak in order to get fluent. So there's a lot of people who want to speak, but maybe they don't live in an English-speaking country, or they don't have anyone to practice with. And I say, oh, that doesn't matter. I can get you fluent even if you don't have those things.
Exactly. And I'm just thinking about that. For me, I've also learned some Mandarin words without even having the intent of learning Mandarin. So in my lessons, I would have students speaking to their parents, or parents speaking to the students, and I would just catch the words without even realizing. And then one day I realized, oh, I actually understand what they're saying. Maybe not fully, but I understand what they're saying. And I was really confused by, how did I learn Mandarin when I didn't sit down with the Mandarin native speaker or teacher and tell them to teach me Mandarin? And when you explained listening is very important, speaking comes after, then I realized that that is the case. And now I can speak a few Mandarin words. I can introduce myself because I now understand. So this is, it's really true. It's really, really true. And if you're in doubt, try it out. Go to Drew's channel. If you are listening on YouTube, the links will definitely be in the bio. If you're listening on italki, the links will definitely be in the description. You can go there, watch the videos, and try it out. And even if before you download the app, before you pay for the course, just try it out and see if it works. If it doesn't, then okay, fine, it doesn't work. But I guarantee you that it does work. Now, if you are here on italki on YouTube and you're looking for an English teacher who at least tries to incorporate the principles and insights that have been shared by Drew, please feel free to click on my profile on italki, or if you're on YouTube, click the link in the bio and book a session with me. Once again, Drew, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. And I'm happy to know that other people are discovering this way of learning. It's really not anything new. I haven't developed like a new technique. I'm just reminding people that, hey, you should learn the same way you learned your native language. So it seems like a revolutionary thing, but it's really just reminding people of the truth.
Right. Well, thank you, Drew, and thank you to all the listeners out there. Until next time, happy learning.